Hello there! This is the last video in my series covering the Pocketbook Inkpad X Pro. And so this is the culmination of videos. We started with kind of an unboxing and looking at the hardware. We did kind of a visual tour of the user interface and all the applications that are on the device. Looked into a little more detail in some of those areas in the third video and included our battery test results. And finally here, we conclude with the formal review. We're going to go right into looking at the pros and cons of the device. I break those into primary and secondary. So primary pros and cons are reasons why you might or might not want to purchase the device. And secondary are, I think, both pros and cons aren't necessarily reasons to purchase or not purchase, but there are things I liked or didn't like, and I wanted to call those out. So that's how this will be structured. After that conversation, we'll go into looking at where this device kind of, who's it for and how it fits in the marketplace. I'll do a little bit of a comparison of this device with Mobiscribe. I've got a little bit of an angle on that, and then we'll wrap up. So I hope you enjoy it and find it informative. Let's get right on in. Okay, so we start off, as always, with the main pros of the device, possible reasons why someone would want to purchase this particular item. And we'll start with probably the most notable feature of this device, which is its weight. So to put this into a little bit of context, the Kobo Ellipsa 2e is roughly 10% lighter than the Kindle Scribe, and the X Pro is 10% lighter than the Kobo 2e. So it's certainly the lightest of the 10-inch screen devices that I've ever tested by a pretty large margin. So that's probably the most distinguishing feature of this device relative to other devices on the market. In addition to that, it has thin bezels. So if you look at the bezels, on the sides and on top, try to get this without glare. There you go. Very thin. In fact, so much so that during the review process, I was kind of going between this device and the Kobo Ellipsa as I was reading novels on each. And the thinness of the bezels is such that it kind of makes the screen feel bigger than it is. So both devices had 10-inch screens, but I felt like the Pocketbook's was just a little bit bigger, even though it isn't. And I think that's because of the bezels. I should point out that the screen itself is sunken into the device, so the bezels do have a ridge on the inside, but I never found any issues with that. That just wasn't a concern. Continuing with our pros, though, there are two native reading apps that have a lot of customization to each, and so there's got, between those two, there's got to be something in there that would work for an end user. So a lot of variety there, and definitely you can see the focus of this device is around reading. So now our attention turns to some reasons why you might not want to purchase this device, and top on that list is the expense. This is a $420 device. Granted, it does come with kind of a nice case or pouch, if you will. However, that's pretty expensive in the marketplace. And at the end of the pros and cons, I'll actually go into a little bit more detail on this. But the short of it is that for what you're getting relative to other products in the market, it's priced at a little bit of a premium, and it really needs to be priced at a discount. So this is, I would say, the number one reason why you wouldn't purchase the X Pro. Battery performance, though, comes in a really close second, and as you saw in the previous video where we go into much more detail about the battery results, it was one of the worst devices on virtually every single category that I measure. It did not do well from a battery perspective, and so it's got a lot of room to improve there. It does run Android 8.1. Now, we're in a world right now where there's devices that have Android 11 or Android 12. That is e-ink devices. And a lot of people, are favoring the Android 12s because, it's more advanced. You're going to get more updates over time. But from a material perspective, in a lot of ways, there's not a tremendous amount of difference between Android 11 and Android 12, just in terms of performance and the apps you can download. There is in Android 8.1. I couldn't download OneNote, for example. I couldn't download other Microsoft applications. That was a real limitation of using such an older version of this operating system. So definite con, especially when all other competitors are doing more recent versions of Android. The device is pretty sluggish in HD mode, and this is a little bit, I have to be clear about what I'm saying here. That's not that unusual. HD mode on other devices is also a little bit more sluggish. So for example, if I have a book on HD mode, then it probably will take about 2 seconds to flip pages. That's certainly true here, and that's not that different from other devices. The reason why I'm calling this out, though, is everything defaults into HD mode. So anytime you download an app or when you just start the system, everything's in HD mode. You have to go in and you have to put it on normal, which is what I thought was the best balance between performance and the visual experience. And so they kind of really shove that in your face that it's a slower device because by default it is. Granted, you can switch the refresh rates and it performs much better. But I think I'm putting it here on this list just because they made HD mode so prominent on the device and so ever present. So I would consider this a significant con as a result of that. I suppose you could argue that maybe it should be a secondary con because you can adjust that and get slightly better performance, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the fact they made it a default and there's no way to change the default kind of upped it for me. The note-taking app is pretty simple. It's a little more complicated than what you see on a Kobo or on the Kindle, but it's not anywhere near, books or Supernote or Remarkable. It's kind of in the middle, closer to the Kobos and Scribes. So if you are looking for a note-taking device, this really wouldn't be the device you'd look for. This is more of a device you're looking for the reading experience with note-taking attached. And so the note-taking app kind of reflects that. All right, so that takes us to the secondary pros of the device. And again, these are things that I like about the device, but I wouldn't necessarily buy it for these things. Just things that I thought that were worth noting. And we'll start off with the front lighting. The front lighting is consistent. It's well done. That's not unusual in devices like this, but I think it deserves to be called out because that is a good feature of the device. The user interface is fine. I wouldn't say it's the best user interface I ever used, but you get used to it fairly quickly. You learn the flow and what's where. I don't think the user interface kind of bogs the experience down, so I'll give it some points for that. It does have Google Play, so as I noted in the previous section, yes, it's running Android 8.1, and it's a very much a limiting factor. However, because you have Google Play, you do have access to all the major book reading experiences. So I was able to download Kindle, Kobo, Google Books, and those things worked fine. So despite the fact that it's running this older version of Android, you definitely have the ability to read on those different apps, and the experience is solid as you would expect on any other Android device. It does come with this case, which I have here, and I showed this off a little bit in the unboxing video, but it's a nice little case. It's got a loop for the stylus that you can see right there, and you just stick the device in the case. It's not an excellent case, but it's solid. I feel fine with using it. I don't think it feels cheap at all. So props for including that into the experience. Once you do put this device into a normal refresh mode, the responsiveness is fine. I'm going to fall short of calling it snappy, but I think that it's fine for what it is. And if they'd only made that the default mode, I think that would have improved the experience a little bit, and I wouldn't have called this out in the primary cons. But they didn't. Nevertheless, you can you can make that switch from HD to normal mode, and the navigating experience is a lot better that way. So we're going to close out now with the kind of secondary cons, the things that I don't think would necessarily dissuade someone from purchasing a device, but they're annoying aspects of the device. and worth calling out. So we'll start off with the clock setting. I showed this off in the virtual tour, but you can have the clock update automatically, but you can't set the time zone. Maybe I missed it, but it never displayed the correct time for my time zone because I had no way of changing it, even though I had it update the time through the internet. So that was an odd omission, it seemed to me, in the device's system settings. It has this curved back, which means that when you're writing on the device, it will rock a little bit, particularly as you get to the extreme edges on the left or the right. And that's an odd design choice for the writing. It's okay in theory for holding the device, but even there, I didn't find that the form factor was particularly comfortable to hold. I'm not saying it's uncomfortable to hold, but I expected, given the weight and this kind of curved design, I expected it to be more comfortable than it is. And because it isn't, and because it wobbles, it's just a strange design choice. It's not a deal breaker, but it's not great either. The screen flexes as you write on this, and this is, I almost kind of didn't want to put this as a con. I'm so used to devices that have kind of a glass sheet on top where there's really very little give, if any, on the top of the screen. Here, there's a lot of give, and here's a quick kind of look at that in action by looking at the device at an angle as I write on it. It's weird, and you definitely notice it. You do get used to it, so it's not a deal breaker, but I would have preferred that it didn't flex. It has it leaves you kind of feeling a little strange about the experience, even though it seems to be fine and it flexes okay without any type of damage. It is an unusual experience that I would have rather have done without. As we showed this in the previous video, it doesn't have the ability to attach a Bluetooth keyboard, only Bluetooth audio devices, so that's a little bit of a miss there. No speakers, same thing. Although, to be fair, if you're going to listen to audio on a device, you'd prefer to do it with Bluetooth. But still, just to have a little bit of noise to be able to come out of the device would be nice. Most devices have it. This one doesn't. There is occasional ghosting. I don't think it's particularly notable in terms of ghosting, but a little more notable, particularly for a black and white device, than you see on more premium devices. And so it deserves to be called out. But not terrible. I mean, I wouldn't not buy this device just because of that. But you do notice the ghosting more than other comparable devices. And I'll close with the stylus. The stylus is a very kind of traditional design. It's a generic stylus that you see pop up with a number of devices. It's okay. It's certainly functional. I find it to be a little bit thinner than I'd like for a stylus, so I have to grip it a little harder. I don't find it comfortable to write with. It's certainly not a premium stylus by any means. It gets the job done, but yeah, I would have preferred a different stylus. And in fact, if I were to continue using the device, I'd probably ditch the stylus and just grab another one. Okay, so that basically concludes my formal review of the device. Let's see if we can put this in a little bit more of a context. So in the beginning of this video series, I showed this graphic. And basically what I was saying is I was making the argument that this X Pro device kind of fit into two of these categories. It was kind of competing against Kobo and Kindle as kind of a reading first type of device, but it was also competing against devices like Books and Bigme and others that also had access to Google Play, etc. So how does this device ultimately fall, compete against those two groups? Well, let's start off with kind of the best worlds group. This is basically Books. And the reality is that right now there's the Books Note Air 3, which is the black and white variant, for $400. Remember, the Pocketbook X Pro is $420. Granted, it does come with a case where the Books device may or may not, depending on where you buy it from. But regardless, the price of the two devices is roughly comparable, but the quality of the devices are not. The Books device is far and away the better device. And so this device does not compete, in my opinion, in the marketplace, against the kind of the both worlds type devices. So that's a big problem. Well, then let's focus on the reading aspect of it, right? I mean, you do have advantages to this device. You've got, the weight, you've got the fact that it can, do other apps. You're not stuck in the Kobo or Kindle ecosystems. You can, read whatever you want. I mean, does it compete against those type of devices? And personally, I don't think it does. My predominant issue is, with the Kobo Ellipsa 2E. This is a device that I reviewed just prior to this device. And I was intrigued by the X Pro because I knew it was going to be lighter than the Kobo. And so I was looking at, could the X Pro, be a better go-to reading device than 10-inch space? That was kind of my thought process going into this. And no, it isn't. I am still reading on the Kobo. I really enjoy reading. I want to read on the Kobo device. I don't want to read on this device. It doesn't draw you in. That loss of weight turned out not to factor in at all, at least in terms of my personal experience. And again, if you're going for that, I want to be able to read from all these different apps. You've got the Books device that can do that. And while the Books device is heavier, it's pretty much going to beat this device across the board, no matter how you look at it. So ultimately, this device does not compete well in either of those market segments. And really, it comes down to the price. So let's be frank about it. If the device was much less expensive, let's say that it retailed for $300 as an example, so a little over $100 less than it currently does, I might have a totally different feeling about that. In fact, this might be a good time to kind of use the analogy of the Mobiscribe. So, quick aside, and I've reviewed the Mobiscribe Wave, and so you can go take a look at my reviews on that. But I was really impressed by that device. But it too didn't have the features or the premium quality of a Books device, as an example. But it was okay because it was still really good and it was still a very polished experience, and it was marketed and priced in a very smart position. So you can imagine you've got your Books or other premium devices here, and then down here you've got people who, maybe they have an e-reader like a Kindle or a Kobo, but they've never bought a note-taking device before. They're kind of interested in that, but they don't want to pay premium prices for it. The Mobiscribe was perfectly positioned for that. It was very smart. And it also, I think, had certain aspects that also were encouraging to people that maybe just had e-readers. For example, it was waterproof. It was portable. Those types of things. And so Mobiscribe was really well positioned, and it made sense. This device, the X Pro, could have done the same thing. I don't think it's as polished as the Mobiscribe, so the analogy isn't perfect. But if it had leveraged itself from a pricing perspective to be between, and that's kind of that same kind of space that Mobiscribe's occupying. Obviously, it'd be a little bit more expensive because it's a 10-inch screen versus an 8-inch screen. But the whole package would have made a lot more sense. But it doesn't. It sells at the premium range, and there are just better options available. So ultimately, if they had just tweaked the price, I think this device would have had more of a case to make for itself. Even though it's a little rough around the edges, even though there's things I don't like about it, I just think it would be more compelling if it sold, say, for around $300, maybe even $325, but not at $420. To put it another way, I was kind of going through a thought experiment. Let's say that you were someone that had an e-reader, or maybe you've never had an e-reader. You certainly don't have an e-note-taking device, and suddenly someone gifts you the X Pro. What would you think about the X Pro? Well, I think that particular person would, they'd notice a little bit of the quirkiness of it. They'd, take a little bit of time to get used to it. But I think what that person would predominantly walk away with was like, look at all the things it can do. Look at all the reading apps that are available on the device. They look at the powerful native apps where you can sideload documents and read. I mean, there's a lot to like there. This is not a terrible device. The problem is the pricing. And if you eliminated the pricing, there's just a lot of positives here. It's just that other devices at the same price can do it better. That's the problem ultimately for this. And I can't really think of a way to recommend this device unless you're in a situation where maybe through tariffs or what have you, there is a price difference where the Pocketbook comes out a little cheaper as a result. And certainly if you're from Europe, the Pocketbook seems to cater to that geography. So if in that situation, you can get the Pocketbook at a discount, or you don't have access to other devices, would you look at the X Pro? You might. I mean, but it's a very myopic situation, right? And if that book's Note Air 3 was available, I wouldn't look at the Pocketbook device at all. So, especially if they're comparably priced like they are here in the United States. That's my 2 cents on that. Okay, well, that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed the series. I did enjoy reviewing this device, despite the fact that I ultimately can't recommend it to anyone, but it had promise, and it was interesting to explore that promise. If you have any questions about the review, please put them in the comments. I try to answer all the questions that I can. So I'm always looking out for comments, so just go ahead and post those there. Subscribe if you would. I would appreciate it. I plan to continue to review devices throughout this year and, perhaps into the future as well. So we'll see how that goes, but certainly I plan to be around for a while. All right, thank you very much. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.